Yep. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get going, I suppose.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I'm going to start up my video here,
Yes.
Fabio. Let's see if this works.
Yeah. Yes. That might be interesting otherwise. Yes. Hey, Mike. So.
Does that work?
Yeah, it does. So I can see you. I'm going to show you the rest of the class. All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to be a little bit analog and creative in terms of the exercise, because obviously you're not going to be able to see them doing things unless you guys finally fix that holoportation app that you've been promising for a while. Yeah, so sounds good. I think, yeah, the gist of it is working anyway.
Hey, Fabio, give me a time check. What's the time in Melbourne?
So it's actually 1:37 at the moment.
Okay.
So we can probably get going in 1 or 2 whenever you're ready.
Okay.
I'll just super briefly intro you. I guess you have part of the intro in there anyway, but I think it's worthwhile doing this.
Yeah. So you think that the room microphones will work, right? So I'll be able to hear the class?
Yeah, you should be able
to.
Yeah. Otherwise, I will just rock up to the students and give them the spare microphone. So we have 2 microphones.
Okay.
All right. So I think we can get going. So this is definitely a first for you guys as well. So probably your first Skype lecture ever. So we're really, really happy to have Mike Pell remotely joining us for this guest lecture. So Mike will guide us through talking about all this envisioning process, and he'll also talk about lots of the stuff they do in design at the Microsoft Garage. Mike has been a former employee at Pixar, has also been in that very, very special task force who donated PDF to the world. We'll make sure to actually link his article. He's writing an article series about that. It's a very interesting perspective on what they did back then. And then eventually landed at Microsoft, and at some point in time, he started to be the design lead and lead Envisioneer for Microsoft Garage in Redmond. And, he also has big impact worldwide. So I think I'll just hand it over to Mike to get started. And, we will see how we go. This is very peculiar in the way we're trying to set it up. So we'll try to make it work, but, shout out if something is breaking or, we should be good though. All right? Thanks, Mike.
Sounds good. So you guys can hear me okay, first of all? Yeah, like no weird echoing, no, like whatever. Am I sitting too close to the camera? Am I too scary? Okay. Hey, can you tell that I've been up hacking for the last 12 hours? Look a little ragged, maybe. So today was the first day of Microsoft's Global Hackathon. This is the 5th year running that we've been doing this. So we have every Microsoft employee and all of our college interns come in and hack for 2 days. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, has asked everybody to either start a project or join a project for these 48 hours. And then at the end, we have a science fair for people who want to participate in that. But it's a fantastic event. People are really excited. We have over 22, if you don't tell anybody, we have over 22,000 people hacking at the same time worldwide in almost 400 cities around the world. And I can guarantee you some of those people are in Melbourne right now. So it's pretty fun. I wish I could show you the tents that we built. It's really amazing. But the point I wanted to make is hacking, like prototyping, doing envisioning, whatever you want to call it, is crucial to figuring out how to get things done properly, right? We almost never do things right the first time, but this process of iteration and trying things and not being afraid to fail, this is super important to Microsoft, our culture, and certainly our customers. And so hopefully if I can get anything across to you in this lecture, it really has nothing to do with envisioning. It has to do with your desire to be curious and want to learn and figure these things out and not being afraid to do it wrong or to fail. Nobody ever learns anything from doing something right the first time, right? It's always in those moments where something didn't work out that we really get our best insights. So just wanted to sort of open with that. And so I'll also say that thank you very much for the intro, Fabio. I really appreciate that. This is really my pleasure. This is my first opportunity to talk to a class in this way. I've done lots of talks about mixed reality design, but this is a different format for me. And I love when people ask questions. So if during the lecture anybody has a question, I'm happy to stop and address it. So just raise your hand, let Fabio know to interrupt me, and then we'll do it that way. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, see, I just want to show you, I'm super important, right? I got my all access pass, right? See that? Hackathon, pretty cool, right? One thing that I do, it's funny, you guys will think this is a joke, but I'm going to start off by showing you this. Okay, so as part of the hackathon, we need to do, so I'm the creative director for this entire gigantic worldwide hackathon. We're always looking for new things to do that show off some of the latest technologies. One of the latest things that we've done is we've tried to show people that augmented reality, so in particular, like using a phone, right, can be a very effective way to tell stories. So I'm going to try to illustrate something to you really quickly. We'll see if this works out. So we have these are our badges, right, that all the hackers have, wearing, around their neck. And so the way that, I'm going to see if I can make this work with what you can see, okay? And you guys are going to have to tell me if you can see this or not. We hooked up an augmented reality experience.
Not quite in field of view.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm still scanning.
Okay.
Oh, I got you. I'm doing this the wrong way. So this is going to be super difficult. All right, let's try it this way. Can you see that?
I can't believe the hackathon is finally here. Really great. This is all super exciting.
Move it towards your body, Mike.
What's that?
Move towards you a bit more.
Oh, okay. Oh, more towards me. Okay, yes. Got it. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, the camera. Yes.
I can't believe the hackathon is finally here. Really great. This is all super exciting.
Right. So I'm using my badge, using my phone, and we're telling a story on top of the surface of the badge. Right? Did you guys kind of sort of see that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's a really good example for me of using these latest technologies for storytelling. Right? People are freaking out because they didn't know that you could do that. Right? They had never seen augmented reality before. In a very similar way, we set up a Windows mixed reality, super beefy laptop and the Samsung Odyssey headset, right? Put people into mixed reality, really virtual reality, for the very first time. And what happens when you put people in virtual reality for the first time? Right, they freak out, right? It's down to the person. Everybody always does. It's so great. So we had a lot of fun being able to do that this week, and it sort of helped me to understand that we are really still at the very, very beginning of this whole thing. So don't feel like if you're taking this class and you don't really know a lot about augmented reality or mixed reality or virtual reality, don't worry. We're at the very beginning. So don't worry about it. Fabio is going to take good care of you and make sure that you get through this whole thing. And what I'm going to try to do is tell you more about the design and storytelling aspect of what we're trying to do with mixed reality. And this applies to not just the work that we're doing in AR and MR and VR. It'll apply to anything. If you go on to become, let's say, work for a game company, or you're going to go work for Adobe or Facebook or Google or some other high-tech company, the storytelling techniques that you learn in this class will apply in many, many situations. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, let's get started because we got a lot to cover today. So it's going to take me just a sec I'm going to project my screen here. It's always such a pleasure to use Skype.
Yeah. Hey, it's your product.
Yeah, it's our product, all right. Okay, so you can see my screen, right?
It's coming up.
Coming up right now?
Yep, good.
Okay. So am I still broadcasting
Yes,
on the video?
Yep.
Okay. So you have the slides on one and my face on the other?
Yes.
Oh?
Yep.
I guess I can get rid of my face, but all right, I'll stay here just for context. Try to keep everybody awake after lunch, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is really, as Fabio was telling you, envisioning can be a very, very handy tool in the set of things that you learn within this class to deal with mixed reality, artificial intelligence, other technologies. It will definitely serve you in other purposes. And another super important point for us to get across right away is this is not just something that you do at the beginning of a project. This is useful throughout the life of any project if you choose to use it that way. So I'm just going to run really quickly through some things. So for me, like, what is envisioning? Envisioning is when, for example, you might be reading a book, right? Whether it's on your iPad or like reading a real book. And, you know, all of us, when we read fiction or you know, sometimes, you know, even historical accounts of things, we use our imaginations to sort of conjure up pictures to help us understand or help us sort of live what's going on, you know, in the narrative that we're reading. In my particular case, I was reading Ready Player One last summer. And it was an excellent book, by the way. If you've seen the movie, you should go back and read the book if you haven't. I was sitting out on my back deck, and I was reading Ready Player One, and I was thinking to myself, wow, it would be really fun if I could have some holograms, right, mixed reality holograms, come and act out some of these scenes, because I wasn't familiar with all of the heroes that were in the story. Now, there were some special guest appearances. If you haven't seen the movie, I won't ruin it for you, but there were some fantastic characters that showed up throughout the book. And I wasn't that familiar, but I wanted to see them as holograms. And so for me, envisioning what could be possible while reading that looked like this, right? So I went from a thought. I had a thought that maybe some of these characters could show up. As I was reading, you see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but as I was reading, I thought to myself, if I highlighted this little section that says I was Ultraman, why couldn't, you know, Ultraman and his arch nemesis in this particular scene show up and, you know, put me right in the center of the action? And so in this particular, you know, this is a sketch that I did, you know, after thinking about this, you know, so I'm sitting out here on my deck and, you know, I have a fire and I'm reading my iPad and, you know, it was like a really great scene. This was a good example to me of what envisioning is all about. It is taking an idea, making it real enough to show someone else and being able to have a discussion about it. Make sense? That's really as simple as it gets. Now, envisioning takes lots and lots of different forms, and we're going to go through all those because my hope is that today I'm going to teach you a lot of the different very quick ways to do envisioning, hoping that we can get that down and it will help you in your classwork. So another example of when envisioning might come in handy is when you're just out walking around. So as designers, we're sort of taught to observe the world around us and pay close attention to some of the detail because it might actually come in handy, you know, for future projects. So as one of the exercises I'm going to ask you to do is as you're walking around campus or going home later tonight or like going out, you know, maybe to be with friends or family, just sort of like try to notice what's happening. Like look at the environment, look at the spaces around you. What I like to do is when I'm out, you know, like this, in this particular image that you're looking at, this is a hotel lobby that I walked into one evening. I noticed that this is like, to me, this is a really beautiful space. There's like couches for sitting. It's very open. So these beautiful stone and these big plants, and the lighting was very dramatic. But it was cold because there was no people in there. And I thought to myself, like, wow, what a gigantic waste of space and money and time if no one's going to be enjoying the space. And so for me, envisioning what could be possible turned into the idea, well, if I'm walking through the space, why can't there be, you know, like a dancing light monster hologram and a DJ that's being, you know, broadcast live from Brooklyn and an electronic fireplace over here that people sitting, you know, could actually enjoy. So I went from this is a, you know, cold and lifeless kind of a space to envisioning that it could be very full of life, but using holograms to sort of fill it in. So that makes sense, right? What you're going to learn in this class, I hope, is how to do this yourselves for real, right? How to actually do the programming to not only create these holograms, right, these mixed reality pieces of digital content, but also learn a bit about the artificial intelligence behind doing some of this work, or at least, you know, enough of the logic to make these things possible. Right, Fabio?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so you heard me mention the word hologram, and there's a lot of debate these days about what is a hologram exactly, you know, and how does it relate to mixed reality and augmented reality and virtual reality. And I'll just say simply, holograms traditionally are things that are they're content, right, that are projected light. So in the most strict sense, you need a laser, you know, and some light beams to create a hologram. Now, Microsoft's marketing department decided that when it first came out with our initial holographic operating system, that's what these actors, these characters, these objects would be called. They'd be called holograms. I kind of like that, being a fan of science fiction. Holograms are completely throughout all of our science fiction movies. They're interfaces, they're characters, they're, you know, things that the people rely on. And so when I'm thinking about teaching this class about design, the very first thing that always comes up is, well, are you talking about this kind of hologram? Right, you know, the very classic, you know, Princess Leia from the original Star Wars, where she literally is projected light, and presumably, you know, R2-D2 has some type of laser that's projecting this. Or am I talking about the more modern type of hologram that's more photorealistic, more vivid, lit, has shadows, is able to move in very interesting ways? And for me, I'm much more interested in the more modern. I respect the classic, but I'm more interested in teaching you about the characteristics and how to use modern holograms within mixed reality to accomplish some of the envisioning that you're going to need to get through this class. So this is the spectrum. Like, you've seen this many times. For me, you know, this sort of starts, like, if you look at the far left over here with physical reality, this is, you know, the world that we live in today, right? You know, it's like physical, you understand it, you've understood it your whole life. Recently, we've had augmented reality show up where you're holding a phone or a tablet or some other device, even glasses in some cases, and what you're seeing are holograms, you know, digital content that's sort of attached to other things, right? Like I could, you know, look through my phone, right? I'm like sort of looking through my phone, and I can see something through the lens of the phone or the iPad. Augmented reality started off kind of clunky. It was like text and images that were sort of glued to real-world objects, and it wasn't very compelling, and it wasn't very interesting. But recently, we've gotten pretty good at augmented reality to the point where it would be hard to tell it from mixed reality. So traditionally, mixed reality meant that wearing a headset, right, with special optics, I could view holograms mixed into the real world. And that was very simple, right, because nothing else did that. But augmented reality has been getting better and better and better. Mixed reality has stayed about where it's been. Now we'll see what happens when Magic Leap comes out. Microsoft has HoloLens as a developer kit right now. But augmented reality and mixed reality are sort of blurring together, right, as far as their capabilities. They both inject digital content or holograms into our real world. Virtual reality, as you know, is completely immersive, right? You don't see anything of the outside world. You're completely immersed. And then the last one on the far right that I want to talk to you about is what I call artificial reality. I think that Fabio had listed, or should I say Dr. Zambetta, you had listed out Myron Kruger's originally work that was called, I think it was called Artificial Life or Artificial Intelligence. But it was a really seminal book. It was written a long time ago, and it sort of foreshadowed what was going to happen with virtual reality. But artificial reality now, today, has a lot to do with combining artificial intelligence with virtual reality or mixed reality. And so we're actually going to be doing that in this class. So, you know, I think that this class is appropriately called mixed reality, but I think we actually are going to be venturing into artificial reality. So it's going to be very exciting for us. And so if you sort of combine all these things together, you know, you get really to what we're talking about. So this is what I look like when I'm at work. We built several rooms around the world that we call the Microsoft Reality Rooms, where we have about one of everything that you can imagine, the Vive, the Rift. We love having our competitors and the entire ecosystem in these rooms so our interns and employees can really see everything all together and understand what they're good for and what they're not good for. So I wrote this book, your textbook, Envisioning Holograms, based on my experience building out the reality rooms, observing, talking to lots of people, and learning what worked and what didn't work in development situations. And so I would love to answer any questions about this as we go along. You can even write me, we'll make it easy for you to ask any questions you want about some of the material, but I'm going to try to take you through very quickly. What we talked about earlier, so I do have a very long background using 3D. And so I'm very familiar with, what's gone into this historically. More importantly, in the Microsoft Garage, the part of Microsoft that I work in is very experimental. We like to try things all the time. Our motto is doers, not talkers, right? We really like to dig in, roll up our sleeves, and see what works and what doesn't work. And in the realm of mixed reality or virtual reality, augmented reality, that's a lot. Like a lot of things just don't work the way you think they're going to. And that's another thing that I love to bring up right away from a design perspective. So can I just stop and ask, how many of the students in the room consider themselves designers? If you can just let Fabio know somehow by raising your hand, and just give me an idea.
4. So it's actually it's probably 4 out of the 38.
So like 4 out of 30, 39 or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Unless you have actually been working in virtual reality or mixed reality, anything that you learned as a designer is really not going to help you all that much in this kind of a class. That's the great thing about it. If you're a developer or a program manager or an artist or any of the other things that may have brought you to this class, we're all sort of starting from the same place. And the reason for that is that this type of design is quite different. So when we were building out the reality room, I started to think about what would be required to teach somebody, how could you really experience what it's like to design for this new realm, right? Because it's spatial, right? Some people call this spatial computing. This is really about escaping from, designing for screens, right? This is no longer about the rectangle, right? It's about the space that we all occupy as people, right, in the world. And how do you turn that space into your canvas? And so some people do really well right away. Other people struggle a bit. In the reality room, we also deal with artificial intelligence and robotics. So it's kind of fun to also imagine that, mixed reality is not isolated to a mixed reality headset. There are lots of applications for using mixed reality with robotics and other aspects, and we'll definitely get into that. So that green screens are often used to do video compositing, right, which is another fantastic way to take people and inject them into digital environments like virtual reality. So this is an example of us using our green screen. When we build these reality rooms, one of the first things that people tell us is, wow, why isn't this available everywhere? This is such a great resource for us to dig in and use. How come we can't build more of these? So I'm hoping that you'll have a facility like this too, or at least have the equipment available to you to check out or to use when you can, so you can experience a little bit of the different side of things, right? So if you're not used to completely immersive VR, it'd be great to get familiar with that. If you're not familiar with AR, it'd be really great to do that also. So of all the things that I've learned, over the last couple of years working with mixed reality, these are some of the most important points. And so I would sort of summarize my lecture almost by going through these very quickly. Number one, first and foremost, you'll hear me say this a lot. No matter what the technology is, people are always, always, always the key, right? It is never, ever about the technology. So when you're designing something new, or you're coding something new, or you're envisioning something new, I can guarantee you, if you focus on the technology, you're going to miss the mark, right? It is always the people part of the equation that is far more important. And what do I mean by that? I mean, why do people care? What motivated them? What's the situation? How are they feeling about this? What led them to this place? What's going to happen if they go down this path? So yes, you can have the greatest technology in the world that's like super whizzy and people can't believe it. Just like I said, right? Remember we talked about the very first time you put somebody in a virtual reality headset, they're mind blown, right? They totally freak out. So what's the important part of that equation? Is it the technology part or is it the people part? I would say always it's the people part. Okay, so that's my insight number one, right? People always, never technology. Of all the things that you could possibly use to help you get through this class and get through any other design projects or programming projects that you'll have involving mixed reality and other things as you move forward with your careers, I can guarantee you that your imagination will always be the fastest and highest fidelity prototyping tool that you have at your disposal. So developing your imagination is super important to be able to do these kinds of things. You know, I love sketching. I love actually code prototyping. I love being able to draw things on whiteboards. But in the end, it's really your imagination that unlocks a lot of things. And so that's something that people forget, perhaps, to just sort of sit and think, right, and use your imagination, envision, rather than, you know, immediately jumping in and starting to code something up or model something or, you know, try to like build a, you know, like a sketch of what you want to do. Just thinking through it for a bit, super important part. And then finally, a lot of you don't know what this is, I would imagine. That gigantic brick-looking thing that the guy's holding up to his head, that's a telephone. It's actually the very first cellular phone that came out probably in the late 70s, like early 80s. And he looks kind of ridiculous these days, right? Would you agree? It's like, could you imagine holding something like that up to your head and talking? No, like, it looks ridiculous. That is exactly what it looks like today for people using virtual reality and mixed reality headsets, right? We look ridiculous. Okay, and there's just no two ways about that. Will that change? Of course it will. Of course it will. But this reinforces the point that we are at the very beginning of this whole thing. And so you're going to be explorers. You're going to help figure this out. Does make sense? Okay. All right. So as we said, right, people are always the key. Anybody know who this is? Right. Of course it is. It's Alex. This is Alex Kipman. He's the inventor of the Microsoft Kinect for Xbox and also one of the inventors of the Microsoft HoloLens mixed reality headset. This is a talk that Alex gave on the TED stage. You guys know TED, right? The TED conference where technical visionaries and people from all around the world in different disciplines come and talk about their breakthrough ideas. It's a very interesting format. It's great. Videos are excellent to watch. But this is what people would see in a monitor. So Alex was on stage talking about mixed reality, right? In the future full of holograms. In reality, the audience saw that Alex was completely by himself on an empty stage, right? Alex saw all of these. And so in a video monitor that was behind him, you got to see Alex, you know, with the holograms superimposed into one scene. But in reality, the audience was seeing this. This is kind of a big problem. We've got around this in a couple different ways by doing super, I would say, clever video compositing. But the fact is, working with holograms for the person doing it is very exciting. But for the people who are outside the experience, it's very confusing because they can't see anything. The same thing with virtual reality, right? Unless there's a monitor hooked up to the headset or, you know, what you're using, they have no idea what's going on. It's frustrating, frankly. So this is also an area that we need to work on to be able to share the experiences that we're going through in a better way so more people can understand what we're doing. So I would ask you to keep that in mind, is how can we share these experiences so that other people know what we're going through. So this is a point that I like to sort of stop and say, the audience for what we're doing, right? The people who will enjoy or not enjoy the work that you're doing, you know, in this classroom, and also things that you'll do subsequently after this, are all kinds of different people, and they have all kinds of different motivation and reactions. When some people see mixed reality for the first time, they don't know what to make of it. right? Just really don't know what's going on. Other people, I would go a little bit further, are actually a little worried about what they're seeing, right? Not sure this is such a good idea to go down this path of technology, right? It's like, really? Isn't this going to lead to people getting lost in virtual reality and never coming out? And how am I going to know what's real? And like, aren't these all these bad science fiction movies? Like, isn't this what this leads to? Other people are kind of happy about it. They're like, I can't wait to get in the headset. I can't wait to go back into that. This is awesome. Maybe sometimes a little too exuberant, but that's okay. And then finally, we get it just right for some people, right? It's a good balance, and they understand what they're doing. So the reason that I point this out to you is, like any other design exercise, you really have to understand who you're designing for, why do they care or not care, and what do you hope to get out of it? Like, how does this make their life better? How does this help them do something that they couldn't do? So think about the people part, right? Because people are very different, maybe even different times of day, people would have different reactions. When you show them this, what you're going to be doing some work in this class, and you're going to show it to people, and they're going to have one of these reactions, right? They're either going to be like, nah, what do you want me to say? Other times they just won't like it. Like literally, they're just not going to know what it's for. And other times you're going to get it perfectly right. It doesn't matter. Honestly, it's like there's no one right answer. Sometimes the best feedback, the best information you'll get about envisioning and designing and coding for that matter is going to come from people who are unhappy. And in those situations, I would ask you to listen very carefully to why they were unhappy, right? Don't try to justify your work. Don't try to say, well, you're not doing it the right way, or yeah, we didn't get all the bugs fixed. Like, don't make excuses. Just listen. Just listen to what people have to say. You'll learn a tremendous amount about what, you did or potentially could have done better. So again, listen, right? Listen to what people have to say. And then the last point I was making about our imagination being the best tool for envisioning is where I sort of like to ask the question, when you look at this, what do you see? So anybody there, tell me what they see.
Speak up. Okay.
What's that?
Face, frog.
So this, I think this is some sort of a light fixture. This is over a door, and this is some sort of a security, lighting mechanism for emergencies. Does that make sense? Right? It's like pretty typical on buildings, at least here in the States, to have something like this over a doorway in certain kinds of buildings. But when I looked at this, I saw a chameleon. Do you guys see that? Yeah, like you sort of, I don't know, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so see, like here's the eyes, right? Kind of looks like a mouth, like skinny neck. So remember we talked about looking around at the world, right? Like looking at the world around you. Sometimes when you're observing the world and looking around you, you need to use your imagination to figure out what could be there, or what possibly could sort of change forms a little bit to become something else. That exercise of looking at the world and imagining is really very important to envisioning, right? It's also an exercise for your imagination to sort of get into practice of doing that sort of thing. So that makes sense, right?
Yep.
What do you see? What do you see now? Well, I'll show you my Microsoft commercial. What do you see?
Anyone? An empty space.
An empty space. That's exactly right. So this empty space happens to be the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, right, MoMA. It's a very, very popular museum. So I was walking around, like one beautiful like summer afternoon, and I looked at these, and they just looked like there was something missing, right? And then there was this big patio outside, and it was like this beautiful sunny day, and that looked like there was something missing too. So using my imagination to envision something, I immediately thought of course, that there was a giant dinosaur outside, because there's always a giant dinosaur outside. For some reason, that's the only thing that anybody ever comes up with when they're trying to do holograms and mixed reality. Right? It's like there's always a dinosaur. I don't know why, but it's true. The other part of this that was perhaps interesting to notice was when I saw this, I went from this empty scene, right, to where there's all these little benches to sit on, to thinking, well, there's probably a family or many families that are sitting on this and looking around and sort of talking and catching up. So in this particular example, you see that there's a woman over here with a small child, right? And I'm using a sort of a quick notation. So the silhouettes that are black are people that are actually there. The silhouettes that are blue are people that are not really there, meaning they've been beamed into the scene in some way, right? So just imagine that this young family, the silhouettes that are in black are here actually in MoMA in the space. And this blue person who, let's just say that's like Grandpa's not actually there. But he is able to enjoy being with the family because he's able to be teleported or, holoported or whatever you want to call it, holo-Skyped into the scene with the family. So he can enjoy it too. The same as, there's not actually a dinosaur in this courtyard, right? It's a projected hologram. So these are the kinds of things that are easy to do if you think about envisioning in this way, right? Like look at empty spaces and figure out what could actually be there. So that was just like another quick sketch that I did to illustrate a point. So to try to give you a couple more examples, what I do, one of my techniques is I walk around the world, and in order to observe the world, I take photos of empty spaces. So for example, this is in New York City. This is like a corner of a Microsoft office. This is probably one of the most expensive pieces of real estate on the planet. And what do we have? 3 empty chairs. No people. Nobody doing anything. Most expensive real estate on the planet, nobody doing anything. Is that a good idea? Probably not. So using envisioning, I thought to myself, what would be a good use of this space? Like what could we use this particular space for? And the scenario I suppose I came up with was, why don't we use this to be able to do remote collaboration? All right, so again, using my notation, this gentleman that's the black silhouette is actually here in New York City, right, sitting in this chair. There's one of his colleagues, right, Kimiko, who happens to be in Tokyo, and let's just say she's holoporting in from there to be in this collaborative meeting. There are some holograms on the table and on this little like low table that are part of the meeting too, right? These are, let's just say, actually like robots and toys that are being sold by this company. But they're here in the meeting because some things need to be pointed out. There's some sales information over here in the screen to the left. There's some manufacturing analysis going on the screen to the right. And so we can have a very collaborative meeting, much better than sitting in let's say a conference room trying to use PowerPoint or anything else to get the same thing accomplished, because it's more physical, right? We're using the space and the physicality and the spatialness as something, as an element to help our meeting, right? To sort of help people talk about things better. So again, we could sit here and, maybe chit chat, which is great. There's nothing wrong with talking to people. Or we can imagine being able to pull our colleagues in, and by the use of holograms, be able to have a much more productive meeting and much more engaging meeting. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you understand why envisioning is sort of important in this particular? Because I could say to someone, why don't we like holoport somebody in, and we'll have these like gigantic screens behind us, and we could have the robot toys sitting on the table. You could certainly say that to someone, but are they going to sort of picture the same thing that you are picturing in your mind? Probably not. So envisioning makes something real enough for you to be able to have a discussion about it with someone else, which is sort of, for me, the whole point. So same thing. So I'm walking around at a conference, and I see that, there's these look like fairly uncomfortable, hotel type of chairs, and a low table. And as I was walking around, I was thinking to myself, it's really stinky that I have to go through this printed paper, show guide to try to figure out where is my next session that I'm supposed to be. Instead of doing that, why can't we just use holograms to be able to show me from where I am right now, this is the path I need to take to make it to the session by this particular time, right? It would be so much easier. You could use it as wayfinding, or judging how long you had to finish your coffee before you had to get up and go, or, just is this really the right session? I could see more about the speaker before I ever went over there. So again, this is nothing that we can't do today. But this seemed to me to be a better scenario, right? Like a better situation for me. You can see, I'll point out a few things. So there's, here I am, right, in this little sitting area. I could just walk out to my left and sort of snake around and get to my conference room, right? So this is showing me that. The next session starts in 14 minutes. This happens to be the speaker, right, on today's conference for that particular session. You also notice that so whenever I do these little sketches, and I'll call them, there's always something I'm trying to point out. I'm trying to either be provocative and sort of show something that people didn't think was possible, or I'm posing a question. And in this particular case, you see how there's a coffee cup on this table, and you see how it's actually on top of the table, and there's a holographic projection underneath. So this is actually occluded properly. And just recently, there have been some really interesting developments with being able to do this proper type of lighting and occlusion in real time with augmented reality. So I did this sketch a long time ago, and now it's actually come true that you can do this in real time with these technologies. So I was trying to be provocative and say this should be possible, and guess what? It's actually possible now. So that was a good example for me. This is in the States. This is the largest unclassified supercomputer in the United States. This is at a place called NCSA, right? The National Computing. I forget what it stands for. National Computing, Supercomputing, something or other. But this is all. These are crays. So if you know anything about supercomputers, these are Cray blades, and they make up this gigantic supercomputer. So I'm very interested in data visualization, and I do a lot of my work with data viz things. And I thought to myself, this is a great opportunity to think about pulling the data out of the servers, right? So actually to literally pull it, out of memory and place it into the scene where I can immerse myself with it. And I've done this as an experiment, and you will have an opportunity to do this too if you choose, which is to take data visualization and not try to put it on a tabletop, or keep everything very small in view, but actually let it expand to the room, right, so that you're working in room scale. It's a really interesting concept and something that's counterintuitive in this whole world of mixed reality design. But you'll find that it's very, very effective if you understand the data. And so we'll sort of come back to this in the future when we talk about visualization and what's important and what you should try and not try. There is something important here, right? When you go from knowing that the data is locked up either inside your phone or your laptop to actually letting the data expand, and be part of the entire room, super interesting scenarios around that. Okay, so we're doing okay?
Yep.
Okay, you want me to stop for any reason? Just keep going?
Consensus is keep going.
Okay, so just a few more examples, and then we'll get to the more interesting part of the lecture. So I've always thought when people go to eat lunch, it's really interesting to observe what they do. Some people like to, sit together and chit chat about whatever. Some people are engrossed in their own, playing with their phone or reading the newspaper or, listening to something on a radio. Other people are having discussions, arguments about this and that, and they're pulling other people in to sort of help out with that. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if we were able to see what other people were able to see inside their headsets, right, or inside their special optics? And so you'll notice in this particular example, just like I was saying, there's two women, are like chit-chatting over here about the latest fashion, right? The latest wearables. But guess what? They're both physically here in this lunch area. This is just a projected hologram along with a projected holographic news story, right? The difference is normally they would only be able to, they would see it themselves. Let's just say that it's a shared scenario. They could both see it, but they'd both be wearing special optics. What if I could actually see what they were looking at? As if they had shared or made public what they were looking at, because it was no big deal. Just like if you walk into a lunchroom, you see somebody reading a book, you see exactly what book they're reading, right? It's not private to them. They're sitting in a public place. You know exactly what they're doing. So when does that privacy, right? When you decide, what's public, what's private, how does that figure into this whole mixed reality experience? That should be something that we talk about also. For me, in this particular example, I was just also pointing out, here's another gentleman sitting here, like watching a football game, right? Soccer game during lunch. Very common. Some people do it on their phones. Some people do it on a television screen. You could certainly do it on a tabletop with holograms. And the same thing for the people in the back having a discussion. This woman is here in the room, but you see that the blue silhouette, right, somebody who's holoported in, she's having a discussion with someone who's not there. And that person that's not there is actually able to mark up something about this lunch. Obviously, they like the lunch. They're having a great discussion about it. But this sort of brings up this whole notion of shared holograms, right? Shared spaces. What will this be like? How will you help shape that? So something for you to think about. When you're doing this envisioning, it doesn't always have to be for a particular people scenario. There's lots of applications for this in architecture. For example, we were going to design a new artificial intelligence room where people could learn all about AI. So we just took a normal conference room and envisioned what it could be like if we gave it a special AI treatment, right? So envisioning can apply to something very concrete, like a physical makeover of something, right? So same techniques, same approach, get a different result. Same thing with a room like this, right? We can go from your standard conference room, right? And like this is a standard Microsoft conference room, to sort of imagining that this was the interior of that AI room, to then imagining what it would be like if we got our robots, right, in this room and sort of equipped it to be a better classroom for AI learning and exploration. Right, so not a difficult envisioning exercise, right, to go from that to an empty room to populated. But you too could use that kind of technique to sort of take you through. So then I'll go on to talk about the timing. This takes a little bit of thought because we all like to go fast, and you sort of need to reflect as you're going fast in your projects and you're coding or designing or like doing whatever you're talking to customers. You need to stop and sort of just slow down and contemplate, right, for a few minutes. Is this really the right time for me to go back and rethink a few things? So you'll notice in this particular chart, early in the process, right, envisioning is a great thing to do early because it helps set vision, it helps people get an idea of what you're talking about. This is the most natural place to start, right, the early exploration phase, right? It's, relatively on this scale, right, my vertical axis is wide open and constrained. It's fairly open, right? It's like, anything is possible, I suppose. But you're really trying to help people understand, like, roughly what you're thinking, right? It's not going to be, you're not going to do like 100 different studies all over the place. You're probably going to do a few sketches to give people an idea. As you move along the lifetime or the life cycle of the project, from the early exploration, you know this from other classes you may have had where you were programming or had to turn a project in. You need to go from it's fairly wide open and anything is possible down to you're actually trying to set a concrete vision for what this is going to look like and act like and feel like and be able to do or not be able to do. So this second instance of using envisioning, this vision setting, is very purposeful, right? The first was to open people's minds, have them maybe think a little bit more broadly about what the situation is. The second instance is to set a very particular vision. And then as we move along, going from left to right during the life cycle of the product, we sort of get to, you're about at the 2/3, maybe 3/4 mark of your project, and you know things are becoming real, right? People are coding and it's working and it's not working, and you're trying to figure out what to do, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, maybe we shouldn't continue on that path that we were on. Maybe there's a better way to do this. But you're right in the thick of it, and you don't want to blow your schedule by like going off, you know, on this tangent and trying something right away. So what do? You use envisioning to figure out, could this be the right solution? Could this be the right thing? And then it's because you could test that on people. It doesn't cost you nearly as much to envision something as it does to stop and start coding against something new. Now, you know, everyone who codes knows, oh yeah, it's like I can just code it up fast. Everybody, you know, underestimates how long these little excursions take. So it can be very derailing to do that. So this third instance, challenging norms, is really taking the opportunity to see if you can improve something during your explorations, right, without investing all the time of actually, you know, building out and coding that. And finally, when you're just about done with your project, there's another opportunity to use envisioning to sort of revitalize and reinvigorate your team with a vision, right? So you've gone through everything, you've cut a bunch of stuff, you've fixed a bunch of bugs. It's not exactly the original vision, you know, in most cases that you thought of. And so this is a great, when you're getting right down to the end, right, and this leaping ahead, it's a great time to think about what could you do to help you leap past your competition? Like, you know what you're about to deliver, but now's a great time to think about how to really get really far ahead and use envisioning to help you tell that story. Okay, so any questions on these 4 times that you could use envisioning during the life cycle of a project?
Anyone? All good so far?
Okay, like perfectly clear, right? Just keep going.
Okay, they're still with us?
Okay, we're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So envisioning is not a rigid process. Okay, I'm just showing you this to sort of roughly tell you how I do envisioning, so you can get an idea of, you know, of basic steps that I use. But I don't want you to think that there's a right and wrong way, and there's certain steps that you do and certain ones that you leave out. It's really not like that. All right. The idea always is to try to go as fast as you can from, you know, from your initial thinking to something that you can show people. For me, personally, that looks like it starts off with a bit of ideation, right? I'm thinking like what's possible and maybe doing a few sketches or thinking of stories to myself. And then I'm going to frame my envisioning project, right? I'm actually going to deliberately say, this is in, this is out. I'm going to do this. I'm definitely not going to do that. And so part of it is a feature discussion, right? You can think about what's in, what's out. And part of it could just be directionally, right? Or even visually or technology-wise. Like, you know, I'm definitely not going to use sensors for this. I'm definitely not going to use artificial intelligence for this. I am going to try to use, you know, XYZ technology. I am going to try to make it feel like this particular experience. So the framing part of your envisioning process helps you to get a little more clear about what you're not doing, which is super useful. And then the most important part, of course, is the prototyping. And we're going to talk about the fact that these do not have to be code prototypes. And they're always fantastic when they are. And the reason that code prototypes are fantastic is because they actually work. And, you know, people can try things out and tell you that this is good and this is not good. But prototyping does not have to be code. Right? It can be as simple as telling a story. It could be making a video. It can be lots of things that we'll go over in a few minutes. For me, everything always sort of comes to a head when you get to the testing part, right? So you can have all these great ideas. You can build all these super great prototypes. But until you actually show it to a real person, you have no idea what you have or don't have. You could surprise yourself and really do well with people that you show it to. Or more likely, you can be I would say, like, have your eyes opened, right, by the kinds of things that maybe you weren't thinking about, right? We can all sort of can have blinders on in some time and be thinking, you know, this is definitely the right way to solve this. And you show it to a couple of people and you find out, yeah, they don't have any idea what you're talking about. So very humbling, but again, try to listen when you're doing your testing with your envisioning project. And then once you listen a bit, you know exactly what to do to refine it, right? Like, how can I improve this? It might be a little thing, it might be a giant thing, but you really should get into practice of taking an initial idea, building it out, listening to the feedback, and then tweaking it a little bit, and then trying it again. And then finally, for me, I've learned that any kind of prototype that I make, or any sketch or anything that I'm going to produce in the pursuit of envisioning is temporary, and I should view it as throwaway. You should never really get so completely wrapped up with your envisioning that you're not willing to throw it away and start over again. And that's why the very last step on this restart is so important to me, because you really have to be willing to just start over again at any point. You may even bail out in the prototyping. You may hit the restart button in the middle of prototyping because you realize this is not going to get me answers to the questions that I have for people. Okay, so again, for me, the prototyping part of this is pretty important, right? Like the actual building it. So I'm going to stop here for a moment because I'm going to grab my power supply to plug in my laptop. And I'm going to let you answer or ask any questions about anything that I've covered to this point. Okay?
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Okay. If you don't answer or don't ask me any questions, then no break for you. So anything?
Any questions? Anyone? It's all clear? Yep. Yep.
I was just wondering, what happens when you're quite late in the project and you realize something is just not quite right? Do you have to swap the whole thing out, or is it better to just try change the thing that's not working compared to throwing the whole project into the bin?
Okay, so let me see if I can repeat the question, and please correct me. So you're saying when you're working on a project and you realize that something's just not going to work.
Yeah.
What do you do about that? And was there a particular time, like a particular part of the life cycle that you were asking about?
Like on a business sense, more like if you're later on the project and you just can't afford to do so, or if it's, should you have parted ways with your idea before it got that far? Is that kind of like the idea?
Okay, so you're asking if you're pretty deep into the project.
Yeah. What
do you do if you realize it's not going to work?
Yeah.
Is that basically the question?
Yeah, that's basically my question.
Okay. You hit the ejector button and you start over again.
Okay.
Right? Just throw it in the garbage can, start over again. Right? I mean, there's no use in trying to fix something that you think is broken when you're just envisioning, when you're just prototyping. Just go make a new prototype. I mean, that's really what they're for. You may find that you can reuse parts of what you made, and you may actually want to, in parallel, test it out with somebody just to see how far you can get, sort of verify your instinct that it wasn't going to work. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
But don't be afraid to throw stuff away. That's a pretty important lesson that I learned.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So anything else that we have? Just pardon me for a moment while I plug this laptop in. Keep talking.
Anyone else? No?
Okay.
Yeah, there's one more here in front.
My question is, how often when you are envisioning something that you then bring that to Microsoft Garage in order to get a team or a crew to work on it?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So it was, when you are envisioning something, how often would you bring that to Microsoft Garage in order to get people to work on it?
Oh, okay, so you're asking how often would I bring something back into the garage when I'm envisioning to test it out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great question. It depends, right? It depends what I'm trying to do. So I do a lot of design work in the garage. We're a very small team. We move very fast. We do a lot of different types of things. And so sometimes when I'm working, I'll envision something and, sort of start going down that path and realize that I really do need to show it to somebody like pretty early, because I really have no idea if it's going to work or not. And so that's what I do. I'll have it here. I'll walk around the hallway, just find one of my teammates or somebody that just happens to be, walking around, and I'll show it to them and then try to get some initial reactions right away. Other times, I will not be, like here in the garage, but I'll be like working at home or somewhere else, and I'll realize again, because designers really need input, right? Like we can't design something in a vacuum and think that it's going to be right. So you typically have to find people to check your work, and so bringing stuff into the garage to test out at any point during your development process is always a good idea. So it turns out that I do that quite often.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are cases where you don't have to show things to people until you're much further along, because there's sort of no point, because an important piece of functionality or something isn't quite done yet, and it would be like a big hole. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. One thing that I will say, like this is sort of important, to that particular point. The framing process has a lot to do with what you care about when you're envisioning. So, unlike the real development process when you're making something, envisioning, you can be very selective about what you care about and not care about. You may do an envisioning piece to just, isolate on one very particular aspect and don't really care about the other parts. In a real project, whether it's a service or whatever you happen to be building, everything is kind of important. Like everything is supposed to be there and working. In envisioning, you can frame out the things that you don't really care about. So that really goes to this first part, right? I'm going to make some initial decisions when I'm framing in order to determine what I care about. And so when I go to test it, right, the very first thing I'm going to say to somebody when I'm testing something is, I would like feedback about this aspect, right? So for example, if remember I showed you some examples of like the collaborative meeting, right? Like there was a space in New York, and I thought, well, we can have like teammates who are not in the same space, like collaborate with each other. I could show that to somebody and say, you know what, don't worry about, the whiteboards in the background that are showing stats about this and that. Don't even care about that at all. What I care about is, would you actually use, the space, the shared space, to be able to see the product at the same time, right? Like to see that the robot as a holographic form. Don't care about anything else, right? So you can actually use framing to help you get very specific about what you're testing. There are key aspects always of what you're trying to do, right? Whether that's technology, being appropriate for a particular situation, if it's, what kind of behavior is required, how difficult is an interface, there's a new concept that you need to figure out, do people get this or not? So that goes into the key aspects portion of your framing decision. And then finally, and probably most importantly, people will have very, very different perspectives on what you're doing. And you need to take that into account and actually try to design that in from the very beginning, right? Like we know that no two people are exactly the same. You may have some of the same thoughts or the same, kind of behaviors, but we have at Microsoft, there's something called inclusive design that we try to practice, where we do actually try to think about different aspects of what we're doing from different types of people's points of view. It doesn't mean we're going to design something that's going to be perfect for everybody, but at least we tried to think about the different perspectives up front. Same thing applies to envisioning, right? You're going to have your initial decisions, your key aspects, and then you're going to have to think about all of that through the lens of different people's perspectives, right, and experiences. And that sort of helps you to frame what you care about, when you're working on your envisioning project. As I was talking to you earlier, my personal sort of style or technique for doing envisioning is just trying to go as fast as I possibly can from that initial thought to being able to see something that I can show. So that's like my getting from A to B as quickly as possible sort of approach to things. This is good for many things. It's not good for others. So for example, I would leave out a ton of process in order to get from A to B fast. Other people that have been traditionally trained in design or have been gone through very rigorous engineering programs may think this is really ridiculous and reckless and being naive, and you can't really leave these steps out, and they're in there for a reason. And I would say nonsense. That's not the purpose of envisioning. Purpose of envisioning is to get from A to B as quickly as possible, to get some feedback and have a discussion about the idea. And so I could care less about what's your methodology and your processes and all the things you've been taught before. Don't care. What I do care about is that you actually made something, right? You made a working prototype of something, or told a narrative, or made a video, whatever it is, whatever technique that we're going to get through. You did that, and you were able to share it and get feedback, and that's the only thing that's important. So going fast, super great. Sticking to process, not so great, in my opinion. Fabio may disagree. We'll see. So here's my sort of take on this whole thing. So in the traditional way of doing agile software development, many of you have heard about agile software development, correct? Agile software development really is sort of taking a big problem and breaking it down into smaller pieces called sprints, and working on a particular set of functionality and behaviors in each of your sprints, and you sort of move along, right? Sprint to sprint. There's lots of good advantages to that. It's a very quick way to do things compared to the old way. But what you don't get necessarily is you don't get the kind of experimentation that you would get if you use more of a fast design method like I use, where you're actually doing very small experiments very rapidly, rather than one prolonged piece of work to get to somewhere else. So again, this is sort of talking to how you do envisioning. And so now I'm going to go through a whole bunch of different tools and techniques for doing our envisioning. But before I do that, I'll just ask, is now a good time to take a break? Are you guys okay? Should I keep going?
Good. Anyone needs a break?
Is this such a riveting lecture that nobody wants to leave?
It is. They still seem awake, so that's a good sign. Okay, we'll take probably, Mike, just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Someone wanted to just fill their drink bottles and things like that, so a couple of minutes.
Okay. All right, great.
And just stretch a little bit.
Okay. So the video still good?
Yeah, it's perfect, Mike. I don't want to say, but it's worked straight away. So touch wood.
What's that?
I don't want to say it, but it's all worked straight away. So that's touching wood. We should be good.
Okay. Okay, good. All right, my hair looks good. Good.
Oh, and I'm gonna need your date of birth.
Okay.
That thing, so that we can give you access to all of our systems as well.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, that way we can simplify some of the red tape.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just until I get my little snack here. Sorry that I'm eating in your classroom.
Yeah. It's
no eating in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, they can still hear you. Yeah, they're almost there.
Come on, sit down, you rotten kids.
Yeah, we can dim it. Yep. No worries. Oh, low. That's interesting. This okay? Yeah, we were playing around with lighting. So.
Yes.
That one there. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't quite control them separately. I can only do this. Okay. Okay, we're all back. All right.
Hello, are we all back?
Yes, we're all back.
Okay. All right, great.
Okay, let's.
Okay. So let me ask you a question because unfortunately I can't see all of you.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to, but so does this make is this a good format? Are you getting something out of this lecture so far? Okay. All right. Now we're going to get into more of the practical side of this. Okay. So we're going to go through the envisioning tools and techniques, and once we're done with this section, we're going to do an exercise. Okay. So this is a diagram of all of the different envisioning techniques that I typically would use or think about using and what they're good for. All right, so the red circles, I've sort of grouped them into different categories, what I think, like why would you would use one versus another. So starting on the far left, right, so we have our fast flow axis, right? So things that are on the far left would be faster than the things that were on the far right. And then the other axis, the vertical axis, goes from things that are very real, right, to things that are more conceptual down at the bottom. So starting from left to right, the quickest thing, right, so something that's fast and very conceptual are the narratives, right? Just telling a story with your voice is a fantastic way to help people envision something. It is, it doesn't cost anything. It does take, require a little bit of practice, I would say, to be good, to be articulate enough, and to have enough imagination and creativity and excellent presentation to conjure up what you're trying to conjure up in people predictably and reliably time after time. But telling stories is the oldest method we have for envisioning, right? So whether that's, you can sort of equate it to, as you're reading a book, and if you have ever heard an author's voice, so like sort of as you're reading the book and you're thinking, sort of like thinking to yourselves, remember I told you the story about Ready Player One, and I was thinking of like, what would this really be like? That's a great example of narrative. But the narrative that you would use to do envisioning is that you would tell a story, right? You would tell a story with your voice that would help me to understand what you're thinking in your head. Okay, very quick, simple, free. It takes a little practice to get good at, but it's pretty good way to do it. Another way to do envisioning is to sketch, like literally is to take a pen and paper or to take your Microsoft Surface pen and draw on your computer. So doing that type of sketching is another way that you can do envisioning. Now the disadvantage to doing sketching for mixed reality work is that mixed reality exists in the spatialness, right? It exists in the 3D world. And so doing sketching sort of limits you to something that's very flat, like sort of like a keyframe, right? Or like a single movie frame out of a very long sequence. And so, yes, you can do it very quickly and it's cheap and super fast, for getting ideas across. It may not be rich enough in some cases, but sketching is difficult, but it can be very rewarding. The photo ways, like using photos to do envisioning, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but I showed you lots of examples of that, right? I was walking around, I took a photo of an empty space, but I thought to myself, something is missing here, like something could probably go into this space. I'm not sure what it is yet, I'll come back to it later. But once you come back to it and you start filling in, you start drawing, sketching on top of your photos, or adding elements or doing photorealistic rendering on top of photos. There's lots of techniques. Once you do that, you actually can tell very good stories, and you can envision things very quickly by using photos of spaces. They don't have to be empty spaces. They can certainly have people in them. The next category that I'll talk about are very persuasive pieces of envisioning. So doing a presentation is one thing, right? I mean, anybody can put together a keynote or a PowerPoint and present something, and people would yawn and think that's the most boring thing ever. The truth is, PowerPoint in particular is one of the most powerful envisioning tools that we have. And I'm going to show you some techniques for how to do that within PowerPoint, but just sort of remember that using slideware, presentationware, is a fantastic way to envision and get your points across. Videos are another fantastic way, right? So videos, they're not really fast, right? They're sort of in the middle. They're not really slow. They're not really fast. You can make one with your iPhone or your Android phone, right? I mean, you can certainly add things to videos that you do in that way. But videos are super persuasive, right? You know, I think it's pretty well known that videos are sort of our common language now, right? More people watch videos than read the newspaper, I would imagine, at this point. You know, if you count YouTube and everything else going on the web. So videos are a great way to do your envisioning work, but they take a bit of effort, right? And they're not that easy. Another technique that you might not have thought about for doing envisioning is down here in the acting, right? So acting is you know, like I would say, not the fastest way to get something done, because it actually takes a little bit of effort to figure out, like, what are you going to do, and then you may have to have other people, and then, you know, you have to get reactions. But acting something out, like physically acting something out, is one of the absolute best ways to envision something. And the reason for that, especially in the mixed reality realm, is you have to be able to determine how holograms will react or not react. And it turns out that sketching is super hard for that. Videos, a lot of work. But acting, just having people acting out by either using, you know, stuffed animals or like other props that you can put into place, helps you to figure out the behavior. Moving up into some of the higher cost things, so using three-dimensional animation and modeling tools takes a lot of time. It's pretty high quality, right? It's pretty real when you get it done, but it does take a bit. Coding is the same way, right? Even for the fastest coder, right? You know, whoever happens to be the fastest coder in this particular class, that's a great way to do all of your envisioning work, but it does come at a cost, right? Because, you know, the more time you spend in coding, the less time you're spending thinking, talking to customers, like figuring out what they really want. And then finally, combining hardware and software together, or just like relying on super specialized hardware, is super high cost, but it's very realistic. Right, so it's very desirable in that way. So I'm going to go through each of these very quickly and just make sure you understand why I think that these are good ways to do envisioning. So narratives, right? So words always matter. If you can tell a good story, if you're persuasive, if you're articulate, you can conjure up just you know, as good of a reaction as if you were to show somebody something very visual. Right? So the power of verbal storytelling can't be underestimated when we're doing envisioning. What's the best tool for doing that? It's using your phone, right? It's like just using the voice recorder on your phone. Like that's really the best way to do any of that kind of stuff. And I'll say it's disposable, right? There's no, you know, if you start recording something and you're just not flowing and it's just not coming easily to you, just stop it, just start over again, right? It's like get rid of it. It's like, who cares? You can do very, very quick and lots of voice recordings for very cheap. Right, it's a little hard to listen to yourself sometimes. I know it's a little cringeworthy, but it's okay. So I would say definitely practice telling stories, right? Telling narratives to yourself to do envisioning. This also could help you do storyboarding, right? By just recording a storyboard with your own voice to sort of guide you when you get to something later. We talked a lot about photos, right? I love using this technique. My camera roll is full of all kinds of photos of empty places because I know someday I'm going to have enough time to go back and fill them in. So super effective technique. What's the best way to do that? Let's just use your camera app on your phone, right? Just walk around, observe the world that you're in, and just take photos because you can just catalog them and go through them later looking for inspiration, like looking for those key moments where you can do envisioning. This is an example of just some of the pictures that I take on my camera roll, and you can see, you probably noticed some of these from the examples that I showed you. All right, so I walk around the world looking to be inspired by these spaces that I want to fill with holograms and artificial intelligence. Turns out the best tool to composite your photo with other elements is PowerPoint. Right. Again, I told you PowerPoint is an incredibly powerful tool for prototyping and envisioning, It's a very simple technique. So you take your photo from your camera roll, you import it into PowerPoint, right? And so it's just sort of sitting there. And then you can actually take your mouse or your pen and you can get the inker, right? And you can just like draw right on top of it. It's like literally just draw right on top of the photo. Or you can combine it with 3D models. Like a lot of people don't know. You can import 3D models and rotate them and scale them and even animate them right on top of your photos. So you can make a super compelling scene in PowerPoint with real models very quickly. This is an example of just taking a photo. I've imported this into PowerPoint, and by using my pen, right, I can just draw right on the top of it. Remember the giant dinosaur that you saw in the MoMA scene? Well, that's the giant dinosaur. That was my first sketch of what I wanted to do. It's super rough, super fast. Who cares, right? I got the point across, so now I can move on. So sketching. Remember I told you that I thought sketching was a very difficult thing to do for mixed reality or virtual reality or anything, because it's hard to depict the behavior and spatialness in 3D, right? So it's not always the quickest way to get the point across because you're missing things that you're going to have to explain later. It turns out that, I like to use Photoshop to do sketching, but you saw my sketching except for the one I just showed you where it's like super rough using the pen. The sketching I like to do is photorealistic. Right, so I like to pull photos into Photoshop, place models and lighting, and sort of adjust scenes and like move objects around so that they're in the right perspective. So that's how I like to work, because it turns out for me that's the best way that I can get my ideas across, by using something like Photoshop for photorealistic scenes. Here's a good example, right? So I'm actually I took a blank photo. I put in a couple silhouettes of these two people, right? I added some text, right? So that's in perspective, so it sort of matches, what I'm looking at. So this is a very easy way to use Photoshop to do envisioning. There's a different program that you should try to take a look at to do sketching. The reason that I point this out is Mental Canvas, which is for the Microsoft Surface, is a special program that lets you do three-dimensional sketching. It's a little bit hard to describe exactly what I mean by saying that, but what I will tell you is when you see it, you will let out a gasp because you can't believe somebody figured out how to do this. It lets you draw a sketch that's dimensional and deep, meaning it's not like a 3D model, but the things that you draw on the page are actually laid out as if they were in space. And so if you use, like you notice in the lower left, this has been built specifically for the Microsoft Surface and Surface Studio. The Microsoft dial, if you dial that back and forth, it actually spins the scene around, and your sketch moves in 3D. So this is part of your homework. Like go look up Mental Canvas, like watch a video, like super short video of it, and I guarantee you've never seen anything like this before for sketching. It's super amazing. So now we get to videos. I'm a fan of videos. Anybody can take their phone, right, and record a video of something. The key is you're going to be missing the important parts because it's not going to have any holograms in it, right? So you're going to have to figure out a way to substitute the holograms into the scene that you're making the video for, or you're going to use After Effects, right, and actually use like real photorealistic modeling or, like whatever techniques you're going to use to composite the 3D models and holograms into the video, like the live action video that you're using. That's great. It's a little bit expensive, but it'll be super persuasive if you're able to use that. So again, you're going to be using your camera and videos to do like low quality, like, just super quick things, or you're going to be using After Effects to do like, much more involved things. So in this particular case, you can see that I've taken a 3D model of this astronaut and composited this into my live action scene. This is something that's easy to do in After Effects or Premiere or whatever video editing program you like. It just takes a little while, right? So it's not hard, but it does take a little bit longer than some other techniques, but very persuasive when you do that. The Windows Mixed Reality Viewer is something that people just don't realize that we have built into Windows. So everybody knows that Microsoft has introduced this amazing device called the HoloLens, right? HoloLens is the world's first holographic computer, meaning it's a self-contained computer that you wear like a set of ski goggles, right, on your face. right? There's no tethers, there's no wires that are going to a computer. Everything is self-contained. So what it's doing is it's taking what's in your normal field of view, like looking at reality, and it's injecting holograms into it. It turns out that this tool, Windows Mixed Reality Viewer, which ships on every version of Windows 10 for free, simulates that exactly. And it does that by using the front-facing camera on the Surface laptop or Surface Book to sort of be the real-world feed, and it lets you take holograms and place them into your scene. So again, like part of your homework would be just go look up, if you have a Surface Book, right, or like a Windows 10 machine, go try using this, right? Try using Mixed Reality Viewer, find a quick video and just take a look at it. It's incredible that you can simulate what we do with a $3,000 HoloLens device for free on your computer. So it's definitely a great prototyping tool from that aspect. This is an example of what I did with Windows Mixed Reality Viewer. So I was in my office, and I just, took the live action of, my bookshelf and, my carpet, and I placed this, this cat. This is not actually my cat, if you're wondering. This is actually a hologram. So I placed the holographic cat in the room, took a snapshot, done. Right? You could easily make a video, so it was very easy to do that. You can see I did the same thing. I was holding my Surface Book. I was at Build, and I was holding my Surface Book, and see this little mini Tyrannosaurus I placed in the room, right? That's pretty cool. You can do that with live action feeds. So, and again, another effective way to help tell your mixed reality or holographic story. And then acting, and this is really the most counterintuitive. You would think to yourself, well, if you're acting, there's things that are not actually in the scene. Like I can't see that pretend hologram that you're interacting with. I can't see the people that are supposed to be in that scene. But the fact is, you can use props, you can use substitutes that help you understand more about your experience. And the reason that acting is so effective is you're actually doing what you're going to do when you're done with your real service or app, or whatever it is that you're making. You're acting out the exact experience. And that is the key, because it has to do with people, right? It's not the technology part, right? Like we can wave our hands and we can sort of say, it's going to be like this. But what this allows us to do is really feel if this is right, right? To evaluate the experiential and behavioral parts of what we're doing in a much better way. And so the best tool to record what's happening with acting, again, is just your camera's video camera, right? So have someone be the person who's taping what's happening, have one or two other people be the actors, use props in the scene so you can sort of simulate what you're doing, and then watch the video together and figure out how can you smooth out the interaction, right? So use this envisioning technique to figure out the behavior. And so this might be something that you can sort of figure out by using this acting out, right? So you have two actors, right? Like this woman says like hello to the hologram. This, the guy in the middle is acting as the hologram, and the person says hello, and the person in the middle is trying as hard as they can to be a hologram, right? So they're like visualizing themselves as a hologram, and then the other person says, well, the hologram's probably not answering you because maybe it's shy, which opens up a whole line of questioning, right? Do holograms have feelings? Do they have emotion? Do they actually think for themselves? If you're going to program a hologram using an AI, how much emotion do you have to put into it? How much decision-making about how to respond do you have to put into it? These are all great questions to be answered during the envisioning process. So sound is an incredible part of any experience with mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. Sound really makes an experience. Just like, when you go to a movie, if you're to watch a movie with no sound, it's not the same movie. Same thing with mixed reality experiences, right? Not having the sound is really going to detract from the overall experience. So learning how to use simple audio, editing programs would be a huge boon to you, because you can go into a tool like a three-dimensional tool like Unity, and Unity has a certain degree of sound, special effects, and you can mix, play around with your spatial sound. But things like Audition actually let you create the sound effects that you want properly, which is sort of the important part, right? Like, yes, once you have the sound effect, you can place it, certain areas within the three-dimensional scene, and they're softer and lighter. But Audition and programs like it help you actually put the special effects or the sound together in the first place. So that's why very helpful to learn how to use sound programs like this when you're envisioning. This is just an example of, every sound program ever built has an incredibly difficult interface, whether it's something from GarageBand all the way up to like top of the line, like Audition and Pro Tools or anything else. It's a very steep learning curve to figure out how to use, but it's really worth the effort. Once you master how to do simple editing of sound, you'll be a much better Envisioneer. And now we get to the 3D tools, so things like Maya and Max for modelers, or Cinema 4D. You have things like Unity, right, which are compositing programs, which lets you pull in models and sound and characters and backdrops, and you sort of like mash them all up together and do the layout within Unity. That's really what most people who are working in mixed reality are using to do their compositing, right, and their prototyping. Turns out Unity is a fantastic prototyping tool, and so like one of the ones that we'll look at very closely. But there's a few others of note that you may have tried. Can I just ask, in the class, has anybody used Tilt Brush in VR, like with the Rift or the Vive?
Oh, very few, but yeah, that's
a few. So if you wouldn't mind, can you describe your experience, like very quickly, to the class of like what it was like to use Tilt Brush?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so it's essentially painting in your space. Okay, so, and I guess, we'll talk about it. It's actually my week 3 and week 10 slides as an example. The interface is still a little bit tentative. It's in between 2D and 3D. So there's a 2D part that is still very clunky, but the experience of drawing in space is very, very realistic and satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, it's very it's almost revolutionary, right? Yeah. I mean, we have never been able to do this before. The ability to paint in three-dimensional space is astounding. The reason I bring this up is that doing this type of painting in 3D space is a great way to prototype. It's a great way to create objects, like spatial objects, because you are in the experience, like you're actually in the spatialness of it. There's nothing better than being, in the virtual, right? Like, in the space to do this type of work. So Tilt Brush lets you do that. It's very fun. You can see in this, I don't know, maybe a little dark, but it's like the person, has their wands and they're actually drawing, right? They're like drawing these characters within 3 space. It's a very visceral experience. It's really fun to do, but it also gives you that sense of place that you're going to need when you're doing your final experience. Adobe Dimensions is a specialty program that lets you do very quick compositing and placement of objects in 3 space. They made it to do product placements. So like to take a bottle and like put a particular texture map of a label on it and then place it on a table to do like a glamour shot of it. But it's a super useful tool for envisioning and prototyping. This is an example of what you can do with Dimension. Paint. Microsoft came out with a new program called Microsoft 3D Paint. Super helpful if you want to do simple models. You can also pull in existing models that we have online. Definitely worthwhile checking out. It's a little bit difficult to master. Like it looks like a very simple program. Takes a little bit to figure out where everything is and how to get the effect. But this is something that I use myself to sort of prototype something very quickly with 3D objects and primitives. And then there's visualization tools like Sandance, available through the Microsoft Garage for free, that let you do very interesting 3-dimensional data viz, right? So this is an example of a project that I did where I took census data, plotted it, and then actually made it be room scale, so I could go and explore my data in room scale. You can also, I think in some cases, really add more to a story by adding ambient effects. So it may be some atmosphere, like in these top pictures, right? Some clouds or smoke or fog, very particular lighting, like dramatic lighting. In other cases, making some of your data, look like cities instead of just being a piece of data, like using a particular hue or color to denote something. So again, as you're thinking about your envisioning and storytelling, you don't have to, even if you're visualizing data, you don't have to just stick to pure data, right? You can actually use cinematic elements to try to help your storytelling. So that we'll come back to that. Again, PowerPoint, super easy tool to composite things together. This is something that I did really quickly. I just took a photo. I was trying to show a very particular interaction, right? So I'm just sketching, like using my mouse or my finger and just sketching on top of the photo, right? Super useful as a tool. In PowerPoint, you can take a 3D object, which is like this cat. I just dropped this cat, which is available through PowerPoint, and just dropped it on the table, right? And showed people that this is where I would like the interaction to be happening. I could spin this around, I can size it, I can actually animate the cat inside of PowerPoint. I don't even need a 3D modeler. All I need is PowerPoint. It's super easy. So Unity and Visual Studio are your most powerful combination if you're trying to prototype or envision something using code. And so Visual Studio is a world-class, IDE, coding environment, super mature, excellent debugging tools, great IntelliSense. Unity is really the entry point for many different endpoints, meaning from developing an experience in Unity, I can get it onto the iOS, like, iPhone. I can get it onto Android phones, Xbox, HoloLens, the Vive, the Rift. So it's very easy when I do my work in Unity to get it to where I need it to be as an endpoint. This is an example of using Unity, to do like a quick model. I had to do a model of a space station, so I just threw a bunch of primitives together and some texture mapping, and I was done. Really fast, A to B. Don't worry too much about it. Just get it done. It's great to be able to code. Definitely, I'll say this: if you are the type of person who can code and do a decent job at design, that's a super great combination. I really encourage you to get good at both so you can go fast. This is an example of using HoloLens, right? So using the real device that you're going to be using during the envisioning process is going to get you closer to something that can actually be built, which is really the aim of this whole thing. Spectator view is just a way to see holograms, out in the world from a third-person perspective. And so I'm just going to run very quickly through this exercise, and then we're going to do one together just to sort of close class out, right? Because we've got about 15 minutes left, right?
Yeah, very short.
Okay, great. So I just took a picture of a space, sort of looked like, I needed to fill it with something, right? So I went and explored, so I thought to myself, this looks like sort of like an art piece, like a piece of sculpture should be there, or a painting or something. So I went and researched. I went back to the Museum of Modern Art. I researched how people experienced art, and I noticed a few things, right? Some people are very engaged, other people are not. Some people want a lot of detail, other people just want to see something and move on. And so what I realized I was missing were people, so I went and got some silhouettes. I dropped a person into the scene, so now it's sort of like I'm framing. I want this to be about a person. I want it to be about how they experience art. I dropped one of my sister's paintings, into the scene, so now the person has something to play off of. I thought, oh, okay, I'll drop my sister Sharon, who's an artist, into the scene. And my thinking was, I'd like to be able to ask the artist some questions about this painting, right? It was like, why can't we record how people do their artwork, because I would love to know the backstory. And then you start to add a little bit more detail. Well, maybe there needs to be a little bit of a backstory, like on this area. Maybe I need to be able to zoom in to a very particular area. Maybe using these arrows, I want to be able to sort of in carousel fashion, sort of switch through different pieces of art. And then I went, after doing that sketch, right, this was like a sketch I did in Photoshop and PowerPoint. I went back into Unity and started building models, right, with these paintings, and found out that there were some issues like, well, what's the thickness of this? What kind of texture maps are really going to look good on this as frames? And if I get too close, then does it get blurry? And does it not really work out well? And then I actually got it to work, right? So in Unity, I got these things to show up in my office and was able to walk around and explore them and see what worked and didn't work. So I went from, idea to quick sketch to, coded prototype pretty quickly. So just a reminder that we're still at the beginning, of this whole journey, right? Just imagine what cupcakes used to look like, right? And look how far our cupcake technology has advanced, right? Like pretty good. So, I remember when cupcakes were just like a simple little cupcake with like a little bit of like icing on top. And now you can do amazing things. So in a similar way, imagine that, our envisioning, right, is going to be able to take us to these amazing visions of things that just were not possible before. And again, until you do it, you just don't know what you don't know, right? There's a lot of things to learn about this. So we're going to talk about how holograms align to artificial intelligence, machine learning, sensors and IoT, robotics, and autonomous vehicles. So these are all subjects that Fabio is going to touch on during the class, in various forms. But for right now, I would love to do an exercise with you, right? So like we talked a little bit about inclusive, I'll come back to that. But for right now, I want you to think about this. If you were to do an envisioning project, and I hope that we can just do this super quick. I remember, like, I'm all about doing things fast. I'm going to give you like 5 minutes to do this. I want you to like just turn to the person next to you, like work in groups of 2 or 3 people for just a few minutes. I want you to envision what I'll call a mixed reality Tetris game would be like. Everybody knows the game Tetris, right? Like where the pieces fall down and you have to turn them around to make them fit into the right spots, right? To make rows disappear. Everybody knows what Tetris is?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. What would a mixed reality Tetris game be like? So see if you can envision that. I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Just talk about it, right? Figure it out, draw some sketches, and then we'll report back.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So they're talking?
Yep.
So,
So we'll like with about 5 minutes, or let's say like in another 2-3 minutes we'll stop.
Yeah.
And I would love a couple of the groups to just report out what they envisioned this to be like.
Yeah.
Is that fair? And you can just hold the microphone for them.
Yeah. All good.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll need 2 groups or teams to be volunteers to talk about how they see this working. Okay, this Tetris in mixed reality. There's a team over there. Okay, we already have a team, Mike.
Okay.
We're going to do a little bit of wizardry. Okay, we're going to bring them here. Easy. So they can actually see you.
Well, good. Good. We're going to have like special guest appearance, right?
Yes, we do. Okay, here they are.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Tell me your name.
I'm Yana.
I'm Ray.
My name's Jason.
So
Okay.
the way we envisioned it was, so kind of like packing your luggage, and you've got blocks, sort of, you can push them away from you. I also mentioned perhaps it builds up the space around the objects that are there, so they're kind of like obstacles.
And so like a full room scale 3D version of where you have to clear the ground around you, and there, I guess like the end game would be it builds up all around you and you kind of get claustrophobic with all the blocks filling your space.
I think player has a different experience to control the blocks.
Sorry, could you step a little more into frame? There you go. Thank you.
They can use a different behavior to control the block, like use both control and they don't use any hand to press the button. Yeah, and they can use the put down your hand to speed out your block and play it again. Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty great. So in less than 5 minutes, you came up with a pretty compelling vision of what a mixed reality Tetris game could be like, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't very hard, right?
No, it wasn't.
Pretty fun.
No, and it was kind of fun. Okay, that's what envisioning can be like. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It could be really fast. You had some great ideas. I love the suitcase analogy, like luggage, like that's great. You mentioned room scale, and I love that you even got to the emotional part where you said you may feel a bit claustrophobic if you weren't a very good player, and the luggage was stacking up around you, right?
Yeah.
That's a fantastic job of envisioning. So thank you very much for coming up and explaining that. That's exactly how quickly you should be able to work through this.
Thank you very much.
All right, great job.
Okay. We have room for maybe another team, if anyone wants to come and talk. One more. Has anyone come up with anything different?
Yeah.
Yep.
If not, yeah, okay, great.
There's another team, quickly, over here. Okay, and then we wrap up.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it can see you. Yep.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
My name's Ari, and this is Alvin, and we were thinking of a multiplayer mixed reality Tetris game where you might gain some power-ups in the three-dimensional space to maybe steal an opponent's block if it's necessary for your stack, and maybe the ability to interact with theirs by throwing objects at theirs to like topple over some. So there's a bit of like competitiveness as well.
That's
I
about
like that.
Yeah, so the surface would be based on like a table, and you'd have two people or multiple people playing at the same time. You would be able to see everyone's configuration of Tetris and their blocks coming down.
Yeah, I love that you thought about like multiple people doing it at the same time. That's fantastic. That could be a lot of like very hectic, right?
Yeah, it would be. It would be. So there's a competitiveness as well, and yeah, like you said, hectic. So there's that part as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Good thinking. Good thinking. Again, a fantastic job of doing this like really, really quickly. Okay, so hopefully some of what we talked about made sense. What I'd like to do is give you some homework. Okay? So the homework is I want you to pick one technique, right? One envisioning technique that we talked about. It could be narrative, it could be video, it could be using photos with sketching over it, could be 3D coding. Pick something, okay? And do this 3D mixed reality, or I should say mixed reality Tetris exercise, right? Just do it. Do it before the next class if you can. You don't need to spend more than a half hour on it, okay? I don't think that that's a very unreasonable thing. So does that sound like that's reasonable for next class?
Yep.
Okay, because I think that I would love to see them for sure. Like put your names on them. Like maybe Fabio could somehow collect them all digitally. Like if you can, like do it in whatever way you want, but if it's, telling a story, record yourself. If it's, writing a piece of code, like make a video of it. It's just, I would love to just be able to see something from each of you. You can work in groups, work by yourself, don't care, but just practice doing something with envisioning and do it quickly and do it so that you could share your ideas with someone else. Okay?
Sounds good. All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Let's thank Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So I'll see you next week, and we'll see Mike again in week 4, in 2 weeks' time, and we'll do more envisioning then. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Thanks,
Talk
Mike.
soon. See ya.
See ya.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for telling me I forgot my
Yes.
computer. I'm quite.
So did you manage to get it back?
No, I am fetching it back in 1 hour.